Welcome to Talking Heads on USA Global TV, starring the one and only wonderful Dr. JACALYN. It's a prestigious place where world-class influencers and experts meet, and where you'll find the most trusted advisors and coaches for all things in life and business. Visit usaglobaltv.com to sign up for our newsletter, get the value you need, and be first in line to learn about events and giveaways and other valuable content. Connect with us. Email Dr. JACALYN at usaglobaltv.com to talk about how you can become part of USA Global TV. That's USA Global TV, where the doctor is always in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to USA Global TV and Radio. I'm Dr. JACALYN KERBECK. I'm the president, founder, and chief listening officer here at our network, where we currently have 29 live broadcasts each week. Our show today is the Corner Bookstore, and just in time for Halloween, which is coming at the end of next month, we're going to be talking all about the science of horror with our guest. Before we bring out our guest, I want to welcome the star of our show, the lovely Diane, Floyd, who just finished doing a Talking Heads exercise and episode today about storytelling. She is a master in storytelling. She also has won so many awards for her work as a children's book and a young adult book author. Let's welcome her to the show. Hello, Diane.
Hi, Dr. JACALYN. It's great to see you.
It's nice to have you with us again today. I love doing this show. We get to meet authors from all over the world. And Diane, I have difficulty keeping up with you because you keep putting out one award-winning book after another. Tell us what you're up to now in terms of your publications.
Sure, I'll be happy to. And thank you for the compliment. So yes, A Time to Fly is doing really well. And now Charlie and the Tire Swing's coming out on October 8th. Pre-sales are going on now at Amazon. And of course, you can find them in all local bookstores and at Barnes & Noble as well. And it's very exciting. Charlie and the Tire Swing, I actually wrote several years ago, but it just now made it up through the publisher, because they get lots of authors, right? So I got the call going, we're ready. So I was like, yay. So I'm excited for that launch. And it's actually, that particular book will sets the adventures for Charlie. And it's going to move into what I'm planning, we'll see, to be easy readers, fun adventures for kids to read and embrace their imagination. And the other day I was inspired with a story, and I came home and wrote a story, and I can't wait to see what happens with it. So never a dull moment, Dr. JACALYN.
Yay, Diane. I just love it. You're so creative. And by the way, that was an exceptional Talking Heads episode that you did today. So
thank you so much. Thank you. I hope everyone who is thinking or wishing they could be a storyteller to tune into that, and they'll get right on it, and I'll be there to help them along the way.
Perfect. Just go over to our YouTube channel, which is USA Global TV and Radio. So Diane, you and I were talking a little bit backstage before the show began about horror as a genre, and you haven't written anything in the horror genre, neither have I, but we have someone here today who's going to walk us through the science of women in horror. And Kelly Florence is with us. She has a new book that just was released. We're going to talk about that as well. Let's welcome Kelly Florence to the show. Hi there.
Everybody.
Hi, Kelly.
Nice
Thank
to
you
have
so
you with
much
us
for having
today.
me.
Yeah,
oh,
it's
you're
our
welcome.
pleasure. And for people who don't know where you are right now, please share where you're joining us from.
Yes, I'm in Duluth, Minnesota, and it's chilly and I love it. Feels like fall.
So, is Duluth, Minnesota a place that inspires horror? Things that come to your mind?
I think so. We've got the largest Great Lake right here outside my window, and there's so many cultural tales from all sorts of people who settled here, indigenous folk tales, different cultures, that it inspires, I would say, Minnesota Gothic.
Wow, that is really cool.
Yeah, that is really cool. So when you think about women being involved in the horror, I mean, you could think of Dracula, for example. I don't know that women typically come to mind. So what is the whole thought process behind that? What is the science behind that?
So when my co-author Meg Hofdahl and I started writing about and talking about our favorite horror movies from our childhood all the way till today, we realized that women have always been a central part of horror. Mary Shelley, at the age of 19, really invented the modern horror genre with her novel Frankenstein. And we started looking at all of the tropes of how women have been portrayed in the past, whether it be a mother, whether it be an innocent, whether it be a woman who kicks butt. And we realized that there's so much science behind all of the different tropes and how these women have been portrayed in the genre that it made for an entire book.
Wow.
Wow, I didn't know that.
I would have never, ever thought of that. So I certainly remember Frankenstein.
Yes.
And his Frankenstein and his wife and being really glued to the TV. Oh my God, Frankenstein's married. But to go where you've gone, that is really amazing. So what all did you discover about different women in the genre?
Yeah. So we realized through research that a lot of times creepy little girls are portrayed and instead of creepy little boys, because we assume little girls are sweet and innocent and nice. And so in horror movies, they subvert our expectations. And all of a sudden, it's a little girl that's the villain. The same is true, though, for older women. The Gorgon character, oftentimes older women are portrayed as villains or creepy or scary or typical witches because that's what society has deemed them as. And so we realized a lot of women are portrayed as others. And whereas we like to see women represented as all types.
Fascinating. You know, I never thought about it, but you're absolutely correct. I mean, even in 101 Dalmatians, the woman is a villain, right? Yeah.
Right. And when we were saying the other day, there's nothing seemingly more innocent than if there was a little girl that showed up and knocked on your door asking for help, but not late at night. Of course, you'd help her. But that's why horror movies that portray that older woman or young girl as a villain, it's so much scarier because it's out of our expectation.
That is true. That is true.
Hey, Kelly, who would you say your typical reader is?
You know, we have a wide range of readers. We've had teenagers that have come out to our book signings that we've met, and as well as older people, a lot of women, which is great, and definitely horror fans. But an interesting thing is we have found that people who are maybe typically scared of reading horror or watching horror movies have found that our books are a nice gateway in because we're writing about the science of these movies. And then people have said they read a chapter, they're able to go watch the movie, and it feels a little less scary because they know the science that it was based on.
Wow. Maybe I need to read this book too.
Yeah.
Before I'm gonna have to see the different titles you do. I'm gonna look this up right away.
Yes.
Because sometimes I'm a little scared I don't want to go to bed with bad dreams, but maybe if I knew the science, then I can just oh, that was great entertainment. Now I can sleep.
Exactly. And that's the nice thing too, is that we interview a variety of people, not just scientists and doctors, but filmmakers and actors who portrayed some of these characters. And through those interviews, you really get a behind the scenes look into the filmmaking process. And I always think that that's a lot of fun.
Definitely. Because you find out how they make the gory things happen. Right. Right.
So it sounds like when we think about science, that if there's a way to read or view whatever it is we're looking at or reading as entertainment, and then take that emotional part where we get our stomach in knots and we're like, what am I going to do? And separate it, right?
Right. And so one thing, I know some people said, I don't want to read. We wrote The Science of Stephen King about his novels and movies. And some people have said, I don't want to read it because I don't want everything spoiled for me and know what it's really based on. But we remind people, actually, sometimes truth is scarier than fiction. And so it might be, whatever that movie or book was based on is based in truth and reality in science or a cultural legend or actual history. And so it's just enhancing your viewing or reading.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Very
I've pulled up
interesting.
your website. Would it be okay to go over there and walk the viewers through that?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Let me just share my screen quickly. Okay. So, yeah, this is a great upper third, as they call it, right? The top of
Thank
the
you.
website. So tell us where I should go. I'm over here on the website. Just point me in the right direction.
Sure. If you want to go to About, it's a little bit about me. I'm a teacher at Lake Superior College here in Duluth. I teach communicating arts. And I also have a podcast, Be a Better Communicator, teaching people how to communicate in daily lives, how to have better conversations, how to work through conflict, everything that we all need to do. It's the things that I teach every day in class. And also I have a background in theater, so I'm really passionate about going to the theater. I love musicals. The last musical that I stage managed was actually Carrie the Musical. So the Stephen King story was made into a musical, and you wouldn't think it would work, but it totally works, and it was a lot of fun.
That's great. I just have to share, Diane was also a teacher and also has a background in theater. So
Oh.
yeah, you two have a lot in common. I
Yeah.
love it.
Yes, we'll have to get to know each other.
Yes, definitely.
I can Carrie singing. Woo.
And it was the climax of the movie and the book, of course, is that Carrie's at prom and gets the bucket of blood on her. And we were able to do it with some effects and a quick change. So she didn't actually get blood dumped on her. We had 2 dresses. So it's just a little theater magic for you.
Yeah, exactly. I love it.
I love to know what goes on behiund the scenes. That's great.
It's my favorite part, actually. Even if I'm on stage, I can't.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to watch theater, don't you think, sometimes? Because you're like, oh, but there's so much fun going on behind stage.
Yes. Yeah. I always think about that. And I started off, on stage as an actor, dancer, singer. And then I started choreographing for musicals. And I realized, oh, this is a lot more fun to be off stage. And then I started directing and stage managing. So I agree. I like to be behind the scenes.
Me too.
Yeah. You know what's funny? As much as I like hosting or co-hosting, I like producing better.
Yes.
I'd rather be behind the camera. It's interesting. Yeah. Okay, Kelly, where should I go? Should I go
So if you
page?
click on, you can click, if you scroll down, you can see my best friend and co-author. We actually met 22 years ago this summer. And we met because we both were big fans of the X-Files. And so then it was we had never met another woman who loved the horror genre as much as we did. So we just connected. She's originally from Canada, lives in Minnesota now. And we started writing together. We have the podcast called Horror Rewind. And now we're working on our 6th book currently that's coming out next year, The Science of Agatha Christie.
Wow.
Ooh,
Nice.
So we're delving into all of her mysteries and stories and the real science that she based them on.
So a question I want to ask you before we go on is, how is screenwriting different than book writing?
Yes. So the thing that we've realized, my co-author Meg is a horror novelist. And of course, when you're describing things in novels and books, you need to be wordy in order for the reader to understand what you're talking about. The way that screenplay writing is different is it's so visual. The descriptions are very minimal, and it's all through dialogue that the story is told. And then the director and camera people and everybody makes those decisions of how best to shoot and show the story and tell it. And so it's a lot less wordy than you would think.
Wow,
That is really true.
Yeah.
Something that we learned, we took a screenplay budget workshop, and this budgeting expert from HBO said every line and every page is $ to producers, and so the less words, the less money it's going to cost, and the more likely your screenplay will be to get made.
Wow.
Good to know. Good to know.
That is good to think about that. Let's go over to books.
Yes. So as you can see, we've started with The Science of Monsters, which is overview of the different types of monsters in horror movies. We talk about ghosts, we talk about vampires, we talk about zombies, and all of the science behind them. And then we wrote the Science of Women in Horror, which was nominated for a Bram Stoker Award. And we're so proud of it because we really poured our hearts and souls into that book. And we're able to explore all of these women in the genre interviewed exclusively women for the book, working in the field. And it was just a fascinating look at, as I mentioned, all those tropes. Our third book, The Science of Stephen King, both of these books actually came out during the pandemic. And so we were really thankful that we were able to do a lot of online events instead of in person, and really connect with readers and fans of Stephen King, because we both grew up just loving everything that he wrote. And so to be able to do a biographical element and know what he was going through at that point in his life that inspired each story was really fascinating. And then last year, The Science of Serial Killers came out. It's all about true crime and real serial killers that inspired horror movies. And that was probably the most difficult book we had to write because of the subject matter. It's truthfully the scariest, because these human monsters, so to speak, existed or still exist in the world. And that was a very fascinating journey to go on.
And congratulations, you have a major name publisher, Simon & Schuster.
Yes,
how did that
thank you.
happen?
So when we started the podcast, we realized that we were talking about these subjects every week on the podcast. And so we thought maybe we should write a book about this. So we came up with our nonfiction proposal for The Science of Monsters. We sent it out to some publishers, and they got back to us, and the rest is history. They keep asking us to write the book, so we're going to keep writing them.
That's
fantastic. Woo, that's fantastic.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That doesn't happen to everyone.
I was going to say that.
So I have a question. Did you get to speak to Stephen King, or did you have to ask for his permission to use his name?
No, we didn't get a chance to speak to him. We did get to speak to one of his good friends, Richard Chismar, who he co-writes with. They've written books together. And so that was a nice look into how they work and how they co-write. And it gave us a lot of insight into that there's no one right way to do it. As co-authors and co-screenplay writers, everybody does things differently. And what they would do, and we talk about it in the book as well, is that one of them will write a chapter as much as they want. They'll send it to the other person, and then they'll just continue and write. So they don't directly collaborate at the same time. They just send it back and forth. And it's in one voice because they've been friends so long that it works. And Meg and I have some similar ways of working, especially in our nonfiction books, where we can just both write our own thing and it comes together and it's one voice.
That is fantastic.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm back over here on the website. So tell us, you said you have The Science of Agatha Christie is coming, and
Yes.
then The Science of Witchcraft was just released. What will readers take away from this one?
So this is, as we've been watching horror movies and doing all this research for our other books, we realized we had written 3 chapters about witches in The Science of Monsters, and a little bit about witches in The Science of Women in Horror. But we realized there was so much to write about. And that trope of a witch in history and culture, and also in film and TV, there's so much to cover. We start with, of course, the classic, The Wizard of Oz and the Wicked Witch of the West, because oftentimes women are portrayed as that cackling, pointy-nosed, evil woman. But as we discovered through the research and through what we cover in the book, there's all different types of witches. Not all are nefarious, not all are evil. And a lot of times their backstories, maybe it doesn't excuse their behavior, but it explains why they're doing what they're doing.
Very, very good.
Yeah, that's very
And
cool.
you're right. Not all witches, like there was Glinda the witch, and
Yeah.
Yes,
she was
it's
beautiful,
nice.
Right.
So I must say, when October comes, the witch in me comes out, and I have my skin turns green. I get a pointed nose with hair.
Yes, I love it. Technically it's the fall equinox today. And so it's technically fall, and I decorated for Halloween already because how can I not?
Exactly. I was wondering how you and your partner, your writing partner, actually divide up the work.
Yeah, so for these books, this one in particular, we knew the subjects or the movies that we were passionate about. Meg is a really big Shirley Jackson fan, and so she wanted to write a chapter on We've Always Lived in the Castle. And I'm a really big Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan, and there's witches in the show. And so I said, I need to take that chapter. So we divvy it up evenly, and then we do the work, the research. We interview people together. For this last book, most of the interviews were via Zoom because of just circumstances, but it's a lot of fun to come together, and we send text messages back and forth like, oh, did you talk about this topic? And if people didn't know what we were writing about, it would seem pretty ridiculous.
I'm amazed at the research, and I applaud you, because doing historical fiction, I know how difficult it is. I can't even imagine how do you begin in this type of research? It's not like you can pick a date or something, or am I wrong?
Well, you know, the interesting thing about Meg and I, this is what we discovered when we first met too, is that we have always been those type of kids who would rather be stuck in a library doing research than maybe being outside playing. And I had never met somebody else who loved doing research or writing papers like for school as much as I did. And so this is a lot of fun. We always go first to academic peer-reviewed journals. Through my college and teaching, I'm used to doing that, and Meg is as well. So we always start there, and then we delve out, we pull a thread of research and look at other sources. So online articles, opinion pieces, sometimes, as I mentioned, interviews of varying types of people with different backgrounds, so that you get all those interesting perspectives and things that maybe you've never thought about.
Very, very good. And you met your kindred spirit, or you're for sure.
Yes, absolutely. And it's so fun because to be able to do this anyway, just write about my favorite topic is great. But to be able to do it with your best friend is just next level.
Absolutely. It's kind of like me co-hosting with Dr. JACALYN.
Yes.
We have a great time. And Kelly, I'm wondering, you do your podcast, and what types of interviews are they that you're doing in terms of the people you're interviewing?
So typically our episodes are just the two of us talking about the horror movies or books or TV shows that we've watched recently. We have had people on in the past that we've interviewed. For example, when we talked about The Addams Family, the movie from the 90s, we had one of the actors who portrayed a cousin on, and he was in both movies, and he talked about that he was on set the day that Angelica Houston got an Academy Award nomination, and just the celebration that they had on set for her. And those are sort of the fun little tidbits that you don't know until you start talking to people. And so we do that in our books to interview people that, you know, maybe we're behind the scenes, and you get those rich stories.
Thank you for sharing that. And a question I have, since you're doing interviewing and we're interviewing you, what do you think are some important tips or skills to be a good interviewer?
So I always tell my students, if you are asking a question and you are genuinely interested, it has to be something that you want to know, and then listeners will want to know. Also, I tell students, if you are being interviewed, it's better to pause and gather your thoughts for 2 seconds, 3 seconds, than to ramble and go down a line of thinking that maybe you didn't pause and think through beforehand.
Great tips.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because sometimes people they're so excited and then they just start rambling, and next thing you know, it's 5, 6, 7 minutes. It's kind of like, okay, where do we go now?
Yes, exactly. And we naturally will go on tangents, and we don't loop it through or follow through because, like you said, either we're nervous or we're excited. So it's always better to have a moment of silence to think instead of ramble.
Absolutely. And I'm wondering, when we think about you obviously are a business owner, you're your brand, right? Even though you're an author, it's still a business. How would you say you brand yourself to stand out from your competitors?
You know, something that is interesting that we've discovered over the past several years when we started writing these books is that no one else is talking about the science of horror. There are some other people talking about different aspects of the genre, but nobody else is talking about these real scientific discoveries and facts that these movies and stories are based on. And so we realize that it's, you know, it's very unique, and no one else has looked at horror through this lens.
It's really interesting.
I bet your students love having you, because not only are you teaching them how to communicate well, but you're an author of an interesting category, and they just really must soak up everything that you have to say.
You know, it's a lot of fun to connect with students on all levels, but anytime I mention, you know, that I write about horror, you get the horror fans that come and talk to you after class and say, oh, did you see this one? Or you should watch this on Netflix, or whatever it is. And that's always a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's cool, because it lets you know what your audience is enjoying too.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. And that's the thing we always say on the podcast and on our social media: recommend things to us, because we can't possibly watch everything. And there's nothing better than a recommendation from a trusted source or a fellow fan. And I think that too, through our books, we've been able to recommend movies to people that maybe they haven't seen because it's not as well known, or it's older, or it's not currently on a streaming service. And so we can kind of shine the spotlight on some of these lesser known, wonderful films.
That's so true. So I'm going to take you back to Frankenstein.
Yes.
Because it was one of my first movies I ever watched, right? But now my husband and I, we really enjoy watching silent movies and so forth. So we actually saw a silent movie of Frankenstein. So you, looking at everything from a science perspective, what do you think is so intriguing about Frankenstein that it's gone from silent movies, and even to this day, people are redoing Frankenstein?
I think Mary Shelley was onto something, and when she came up with this story, because she was really exploring the human monsters that exist in Dr. Frankenstein, and taking matters into his own hands, like Prometheus, and having the audacity to think that he could create life, take life, and there would be no consequences. And so she was really looking at the world and science and the patriarchy at the time and what was happening, and exploring it through this horror lens and this monster, Frankenstein's monster. But really, if you read the story and you watch the movies, I feel for him. I feel empathy for the monster, because he didn't ask to be created, and he's just he's doing his best.
You're absolutely
it's not
right.
excusable, but you know, he's a lovable monster.
You know, I agree with you, and I am so excited about what you are writing about, because I think I could fall in love with horror stories now, maybe
Yes.
because of what you're doing, and what
You know,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I fell in love with the horror genre through the Frankenstein, and through like King Kong, for example.
Oh, King Kong,
He too, it's this lovable monster, and so feeling that empathy for a character that, you know, normally is viewed as a villain or a typical bad guy, I think that horror really brings those stories out.
I've always liked Morticia. I always thought she was kind of
yes.
hot. You know, I loved her dress, her hair.
Yes. And something I love about that too, the Addams family in particular, is they have, even though of course they're monsters in a sense, they have such a good marriage, a loving family. They are a really textbook perfect relationship. And when I teach relationship communication, they are supportive of each other. If they have misunderstandings, they work through conflict really well. They're supportive of their children. It's really an interesting look. If you just look at it from the family dynamics, they're a great family.
Wow, I never thought about that. That's a cool perspective. Two questions. Let me think of the first one first. This might sound like a strange question, but are the thresholds for someone to be entertained or impacted by horror different as we come out of this pandemic? Meaning, we've been so horrified and in a state of shock for a couple of years. Are the thresholds lower in order to get someone, I don't want to say to scare someone, but to draw someone in? Or the thresholds in horror lower now?
I think that it's definitely changing. And I know for some people, especially some hardcore horror fans, they say it takes a lot to scare them now, much more than it used to. But there's just saying that there's so many great horror movies that have come out recently. And just last week, we got to see Pearl on the big screen, and it's set in 1918, again, during a pandemic, and how they wove in the real horror of the time and reflected back of what we have been going through. It was just a fascinating look at what that can do to a family and to a young woman.
Yeah,
Interesting. I didn't even know about that movie, so that's two interesting thoughts.
I know that I've been afraid of Chucky. I know
Chucky really scares me.
And I would go to Disney World, unrelated to Chucky, but they had that haunted mansion, I think it was, and you'd get in that big chair and then a ghost would sit with you, and I was always afraid. So I think I'm easily scared.
Yes.
It doesn't take much to scare me, that's for sure.
we wrote about Child's Play and Chucky in our first book, The Science of Monsters, and now it's been resurrected as a TV series. And you wouldn't think it would work, but it totally works, and it's still scary. It's a lot of fun.
That is interesting. And Kelly, I just wanted to ask you, as in your role as a teacher, so when you're teaching students who are in a different generation, obviously, than I'm in, I'm a 59-and-a-half-year-old boomer. They've grown up with devices and with technology, and it seems that you could see younger people just sitting across from each other, not even speaking to one another, but using their technology. How has it impacted their ability to effectively communicate?
Yeah, we talk about it in the communication field as digital natives and digital immigrants. All of us that grew up before technology, we are considered digital immigrants because we had to get used to the technology. Whereas our kids and a lot of my students, they grew up and probably had an iPad in their hand by the age of 3, maybe. And so it's definitely a learning curve. And I have some non-traditional students as well, but there's always a learning curve. Everything in school, in college, in communication involves some sort of technology, and just learning how to encode, as we call it in the field, knowing how to clearly communicate and translating that to in-person communication is really difficult, especially the past 2 years when we were just online teaching for much of the time. And then we were in the classroom wearing masks. You don't realize how much verbal and nonverbal communication is lost when you're not face-to-face. And the biggest thing that we found is that people are much worse at eye contact now than they were 2 years ago, because for some reason, and studies have shown this, we tended to avoid eye contact when we were wearing masks. So it's something that we all have to get better at.
You know what? That's a great point, because I remember just the first time I was leaving home, I wouldn't look at anyone because I was like, oh, maybe they're sick, or maybe it's ridiculous. But yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
And so, and my students have said it too. We were talking about nonverbal communication last week, and they all have noticed that they purposely avoid even looking at the teacher sometimes. And especially, they say, I especially avoid looking at the teacher if I think I'm going to get called on if I make eye contact. And I always say, I will never call on anybody unless you raise your hand. But, there's that fear because we haven't been out in public and, speaking up for so long, many of us, that it's difficult to overcome.
That's true. And when I was in my corporate career, I retired in 2020. I remember I wouldn't look at my manager or whomever if I didn't have the answer. I'd be like, looking like I'm really busy doing something else.
Right.
Which makes it obvious typically that you don't know what's going on, right? Yeah. So where do you see the future of the horror genre going? And when I think about pandemic that we just had, there were movies years ago, you just mentioned one, there were movies years ago about pandemics, and now we've lived through a pandemic. So if another movie comes out, we might be like, well, I don't know, we already know about it. So where do you see horror going?
I think it's really going in an exciting direction. I'm seeing so many interesting, unique, original stories coming out and that are coming up, going to be released over the next couple years. A lot more female filmmakers are getting a start now, and just underrepresented voices. Jordan Peele, for example, is doing amazing things, producing amazing things, making great movies. Ty West, who just wrote and directed Pearl, as I talked about, they've already announced a third movie in that series. And so I think that we are all really hungry for something different. I don't think I want to see another pandemic movie for a long time, but tell me a little. It doesn't even have to be big and explosions, just a little story in one setting. I think that that's really exciting.
Yeah, I agree. Do you have any acting experience or any interest in acting?
I have acted in the past on stage, and then I was an extra in actually an episode of The X-Files and an X-Files movie, because I'm such a big fan. And then a couple movies that were shot here in Minnesota, I got to be a part of as well. If you've seen the movie North Country, with Charlize Theron, I was a consultant on that movie because my grandma was one of the women in the case when they sued the mines. So she passed away, sadly, before they started shooting the movie, but I got to be a consultant, and it was a lot of fun. We got to go to the red carpet premiere in LA and meet everybody. And I think my grandma would have been really proud. She and I would go to the movies every Sunday afternoon. So she would have loved it.
That's so beautiful. I did see that film too. So what did you do in your role as consultant?
So they asked, a lot of questions, historical questions, real questions about the area. For example, they were saying what things that we know if we didn't live in northern Minnesota. And, the big leather gloves, they're called we call them choppers. And they're really good to wear at outdoor hockey games or football games because they make a really loud clapping sound. And that's something that you would know if you lived in northern Minnesota, but anywhere else in the country, you wouldn't know what choppers are necessarily.
I thought it was for chewing. That's great.
Did you get a chance to meet Charlize? How do you say her name? Charlize? Yeah.
Charlize. Yep.
Charlize.
Yep.
Sorry.
She was wonderful. And we all went bowling one night in Albuquerque. We shot out there for a couple weeks, and we sang karaoke. It was a lot of fun.
Wow. What a great experience.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. So how do you, once you decide maybe a genre or a monster you want to go about hearing, how do you begin? Like, do you map out where you're going to go, or do you just start writing, or what's your process?
Yeah, we always come up with some ideas. We think we know where we're going to go, but until you start doing the research, you don't realize the rabbit hole that you might go down, and the thread that you start to pull will bring you in a direction that is really surprising. So, for example, I was writing the chapter on Sleepy Hollow, and it talks about the witch using potions and plants for nefarious purposes. And what we ended up doing, going down that rabbit hole, we ended up interviewing an indigenous ethnobotanist, and she teaches people about the real healing properties of plants that have been used for generations. And so even though something sounds a little magical or a little strange or a little out there, it's really based in science. And just speaking to her about all of the things that we take for granted as we're just looking out at the forest, really everything is based, in nature and science, and we can utilize that.
Fascinating. Just fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, and fun too, right?
Yeah.
So much fun.
Exactly. Another interview we did for the book, we got to, because we talk about Sabrina, the teenage witch, and their family owns a funeral home. We ended up speaking to a woman who runs her own funeral home here in Minnesota, and how, even though it sounds very morbid to be a mortician, really it's a job that's based in empathy and helping people through the hardest time in their life when they lose a loved one. And so changing that perspective of even how we look at grieving and death. And there's an entire interview in a chapter, and I think it's good to know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think they do really difficult works, speaking to people when they're at their lowest moment, and yet it's a service that's vitally important.
Yes, so important.
So when you think about writing and creating an environment, would a funeral home be a good setting?
Yes, I think so. And there was a horror movie shot here a few years ago. It's called I'm Not a Serial Killer, but it's set in a funeral home. And I mean, that just has so many opportunities for horror.
It does. So if you were to play the part of one of the monsters or one of the characters, which one would you want to play?
Oh, I really love The Bride of Frankenstein. I dressed up as her, I think in first grade. My hair was not as great, but I just love that streak in that hair. I think she's wonderful.
Yeah, that's cool.
I
How about you,
agree.
Diane?
I hadn't ever thought about it because I like at Halloween, I like the Great Pumpkin or the Witch, or generally those are the two that I go after. Because I think the Great Pumpkin is funny.
What is it about witches and witchcraft? Like, there are all different types of witches, like we were talking about, but yet and I don't even know if this still goes on, but for certain period of time in history, witches were thought to be evil people, and they were against everything related to religion. Or so I don't know the whole history, but what do you know about this?
Yeah, we write about it in the book, that we noticed that in history, a lot of times when women started asserting their own independence or power or knowledge in some way, that's when typically men would come forward and accuse them of being a witch, because it was something out of the norm, quote unquote. And so especially when men started getting educated in science, ironically, they started dismissing the women who were using these plants, herbs, midwifery for generations, and dismissing it as witchcraft because it wasn't what they considered to be normal. Even women asserting their independence, at home or anything, was considered maybe being a witch. And so historically, a lot of people went through terrible, terrible times being accused of witchcraft. But we ultimately realize being a witch a lot of times is just being independent, standing up for yourself, and taking control of your own autonomy.
Now I know what my ex-boyfriends meant when they said you're a real witch. No.
You were just standing up for yourself.
Exactly. And we can think of that TV show, Bewitched. Remember?
Yes.
She looked, she fit in, just looked normal. And she was one with the nose?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Samantha the Witch. Yeah. She could wiggle her nose and make things happen. But yeah, so I visited Massachusetts, Salem, Massachusetts, and went to one of the homes where they talk about it, and then you have this scary thing going on. But the one thing they really discussed after the show was how many people were burned at the stake only because they were using the herbs, and because they helped people, and because the regular doctor couldn't do it, this person must be a witch. And I remember kind of tears rolling down my eyes because I thought that was the saddest thing I ever heard of.
Yeah, it's so sad. The real history is really gut-wrenching. But speaking of Salem, we get to go there in a couple weeks for part of our book tour, and neither of us have ever been. So we're really excited to go there and go to that museum as well.
It's fantastic. You're going to love it.
Yeah, congratulations. While I have you on Spotlight, can you please share with us about the book tour? Where are you starting? Where are you going? Where are you finishing?
Sure. So actually tonight we have an event here in Duluth, Minnesota at the Nordic Center. We're going to be signing copies of our book, and also we're collecting donations for the Safe Haven Women's Shelter. And so if you bring a donation, you get a free book, one of our first 4. And then we'll be in Salem and Boston, Massachusetts in October. And then we'll be in Los Angeles, California, October 22nd. And then we've got some more events in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, and again in Duluth in November. So yeah, look at our website, horrorrewind.com, for our up-to-date event calendar. And we're also on Facebook.
Oh, congratulations. That sounds like a really exciting tour.
It is. It's always going to be our busy season because we write about horror, but we love it.
Yeah, you're going to end up in LA. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, we've actually come to the end of our show today, and it's been such a pleasure to meet you. And congratulations on all your success.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. It was nice to meet you both.
Thank
The
you.
same
Nice to meet
here.
you as well. And you can watch the show on our YouTube channel, USA Global TV and Radio, as well as a number of other places, but we'll send you an email.
Sounds good.
And
All right.
please come
Thank
back
you.
so we can hear all about your book tour.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that'd be fun. All right. Thanks again, Kelly. Bye for
Okay,
now.
thanks. Bye.
Bye. That was really interesting, wasn't it, Diane?
It was fascinating. You know, I think I was telling you, I used to love horror when I was younger in the movies and so forth, and then I'd start having nightmares. But I think I might re-embrace horror again after having this interview.
I know. I think I will too, because I've always been afraid and I thinking that I couldn't sleep. But now that Kelly explained that whole science behind it, I can look at it differently.
Exactly. I can't wait to hear more and order some of her books. She has a website. We forgot to have her say it. Did you have a scrolling so that people can know where to order her books?
Yes, it's her name, which is so easy to remember. So it's kellyflorence.com. And we also have the link here for her latest book. Let me put it up. It's here somewhere. I'll get it.
I was so intrigued in everything she was saying. I forgot to ask her, but it was just, I've never met anyone who has done that, you know, written about this before. It was just so intriguing, so intriguing. And to learn that Duluth has all that scary stuff. She said it was inspiring.
Yeah. Well, I really like the fact that in addition to her being a writer in this genre, that she's also a teacher and she's teaching about communication. I think that's so cool. That is awesome. And of course, that fits in with you guys need to connect with your listening mentoring. Anybody who's teaching about communication is a friend of mine because I feel like it's so important that we learn to listen, we learn to communicate instead of interrupting each other and judging one another and coming up with solutions no one asked for. And then, you know, the one I hate the most, stealing the stage when someone's sharing their story, but your story's so much better, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, I am so grateful I took your courses and you're not paying me. So everybody knows this to say that because what you just said resonates with me. And I now, because I can think, someone will be speaking and I'll think, oh, I want to say, and then my brain stops and goes, it's not about you, Diane. Zip your lip, you know? And I've just become a much better listener from taking your classes. And I really appreciate it because people think, oh, yeah, I listen. But it's truly a skill. It's absolutely a skill. Yeah. And thanks for sharing that, Diane. And one thing I just wanted to add to that, because you and I have discussed this so many times, is we're looking at someone, right? Maybe we're not looking right at them because of the pandemic, but we're looking at the person, acting like we're hearing what they're saying. But the whole time we're thinking, you know what? I don't like what she just said. And I bet she's this and she's that. And right? And we're not listening anymore. Now we're completely judging the other person. And this is what's going on all over the world. Yeah. And there's a whole film going on. Yeah. I think that's what's happening in Congress. Yeah, I think you're right. Sorry. We'll save that for another show. So we've got the link here to order Kelly Florence's latest book, The Science of Witchcraft, The Truth Behind Sabrina Maleficent. No, that's not right. Maleficent. Kelly, come back and tell us.
How do you say it? It's Maleficent.
Maleficent. Thank you.
Yes. Glinda and more of your favorite fictional witches. Order here. There you go.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Kelly, for being here today. And thank you, Diane. We're going to sign off now because our next show is coming right up. Diane, people can reach you at your website, DianneFloydBOEHM.com. We have that information here. And the film and music show is coming up right after this. So thank you, everybody. Bye, Kelly. Bye, Diane.
Bye.
Bye, Kelly. Take care, everybody.